Welcome to another edition of Office Hours with State Representative John Hampton. I'm John Hampton, and I'm delighted to have you back for another special episode. Leading the charge against domestic violence in our state is a great crusader. My guest today is Mary Jane Foster, President and CEO of Interval House. Welcome, Mary Jane.
Thank you. It's so great to be here.
Great to have you. Thank you so much. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
And I still refer to you as the new President
Me
and
too.
CEO. And I went on the website last night, and it's 2017.
Yes.
So it's 5 years.
5 years. I've been here 5 years.
You're not the new kid anymore.
No. I try to pull that trick, but I haven't gotten away with it in a while.
Well, we're thrilled to have you on the show, and I'm so grateful for your efforts the last 5+ years, because I know your experience in domestic violence goes back quite a long time. So I thought we'd begin with just telling us a little bit about your background and how you came to Interval House.
Well, many years ago, over 30 years ago, a friend of mine said, "Come help me raise money for this domestic violence agency." And I said, "What's domestic violence?" I'd never heard of it. I couldn't even imagine how you could take those two words, put them together, and have something that meant something. I just didn't know what it was. So I agreed to help, and I learned about the issue, and I saw the work, and I watched the way lives were changed. And it was one of the most powerful moments in my entire life. And so I quit my profession. I was an actor, and I went to law school at age 42. And I became a lawyer so I could represent victims of domestic violence. And I've done many things in between, but I've stayed very active in the cause. So about 5 years ago, I reached out to a friend and said, I would really like to run a nonprofit. And she said, "Oh my goodness, Interval House is looking. I'll call them. Here's the link, apply, let's get this done." And in less than a month, I had the job.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And what was your initial impression of the agency? What was your first order of business in getting to work? Well,
one of the great gifts that I was given when I came to Interval House is that it has never changed its mission. Its mission is to end and prevent domestic violence. So the founders and everyone who followed them didn't chase dollars for dollars. They stuck to their knitting, if you will. And so all of that was perfect. It was time for a refresh, to be sure, on fundamental organizational stuff. So with fresh eyes, I was able to do that in terms of, the employee handbook and financial controls and processes. But what I brought to the table was an awareness, a keen awareness of the work that was done in Hartford, which has a singular reputation across the state, but I had never heard of Interval House. And so I knew the most important thing for me to do, apart from stabilizing the organization, was to get out and tell people who we are and what we do. And so I spend part of every single day doing that and reaching out into the community. I'm sure you remember, because I talk about it all the time, but we represent 24 towns and cities. We're the largest agency in the state. There are 18. And the geographic area is just sort of mind-bending. And so I've tried to get to each and every one of the towns. We have victims and survivors in every single one of those towns, and reintroduce Interval House and our services. So if people don't know about the issue and people don't know about the resources, where will they go and what will they do? So I consider that the biggest part of my job.
How many years has Interval House been operational?
Since 1977.
Okay.
Yeah.
And tell us your key services for folks who might need help.
Thank you for asking that, because, one of the things that I find is that we in the business think everybody knows what we do, and they don't. Mm-hmm. But we have very core, all of our services are core to all the other agencies in the state. We have a 24/7 hotline. What's really important to know about the hotline, obviously in crisis, we're there for you. But most of our calls are people trying to figure out what's happening to them and understand what the issues are. So we are there for information as much as for crisis. To give you an idea of the traffic we have, last year we had about 5,000 incoming calls, and my advocates made over 6,000 outgoing calls. I mean, it's very, very busy. So in addition to that, of course, we have a safe house. It's the largest safe house, I think, in the state, 25 beds. We house only women and children there, but we don't turn anyone away. So we have other options for male victims. And last year, by the way, just so people understand, it's not just a woman's issue. There were 22% of our victims were men. So it impacts everyone. And in addition to this safe house, in the safe house, we have an adult advocate, a child advocate, and a case manager. And they help so many women arrive at the safe house with nothing. And I mean nothing. No resources, nothing. And so we help them navigate those processes, keep the kids in school or transfer the kids, as for instance, immunization records, pediatricians, all of those things, and then the job and the housing and all of that. That's what those advocates do. And then we have, I'm incredibly proud of this program, the largest court advocacy program in the state. And I remind people that most people don't go to court for fun. I've never seen a party at court. I've never seen anybody go to court to have fun. So, and the other interesting thing is most people have never been to court. So if you are suddenly in criminal court, it's because the police were at your home the night before and you have no idea what's happening. And so our advocates are able to meet victims, explain what the process is, and help them navigate that. It's complex, it's complicated, and you've got someone who's in trauma, who is scared about their present and their future. And so our advocates work, and last year it was about 4,800 victims in the Hartford criminal courts. In addition to which we have advocates in the civil court. Now, a civil court process is the restraining order. And that's where if you are afraid, but there's been no arrest, the police have not been there and made an arrest, you can go to court and ask for a restraining order that will help protect you while you navigate your next steps. And those are really the core pieces of what we do. The last piece is community education. Mm-hmm. And there's really, in my view, nothing more important. If you're going to break the cycle of domestic violence, you have to educate people as to what the issue is and how to live healthy, safe lives. Now, tell me the relationship with the coalition of, is that an umbrella organization? Yes.
Okay, how does that?
We are incredibly fortunate to have a really effective, impactful statewide coalition. And the coalition loosely oversees 18 domestic violence agencies in the state.
What's it called?
It's called the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence.
Okay, that's right.
And, they have been very, very effective, as you know, in passing legislation, proposing and getting legislation passed. All of the federal dollars that come into the state for this issue go through CCADV. The state does their match and they go to CCADV, and then CCADV allocates those dollars and then monitors them and reports on them. So we are held to, I think it's now 82 standards. There are lots of people who work in domestic violence issues, but there are only 18 agencies in the coalition.
Across the state.
Across the state. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about little teeny-weeny tiny Connecticut, 169 towns, and 35 to 40,000 cases of reported domestic violence every year.
Now, has the pandemic escalated your work?
Statewide, the numbers are about 16, 17% increase.
Wow.
Across the board. Interval House, Again, we're the largest, so we're going to see bigger numbers, but our numbers are really through the roof. The isolation, for one, isolation is a perfect construct for an abuser because you don't have family, you don't have friends, you don't have work colleagues, you don't have your houses of faith. You are stuck. And when you add the other triggers like financial and job insecurity, maybe food insecurity, the tensions just increase.
Yeah.
And so our numbers in terms of providing safe housing went up from about 220 to 347, 68% over last year.
Incredible.
We had enormous unbudgeted expenses. And I'm profoundly grateful not only the CARES Act and the Payroll Protection Plan, but our individual donors and foundations really stepped up.
What's your operating budget?
Our operating budget is just, it's grown tremendously, I'm very proud to say. That's the good news and the bad news, I guess. But we're very close to $5 million this year.
Okay.
When I arrived, it was about 1.8. So we have grown. But we're just meeting the need. Once again, we don't grow for the sake of growth. We're just meeting the need.
Yeah. How is that broken down? Grants, individual?
Well, it depends on the year.
Yeah.
This year, we're probably going to be about 60% government grants because of that's where the money has come from. But I've been trying to keep the government at about 50%. And again, when you're successful at what you do, government funding comes your way. So I used to think it had to be below 50. I no longer feel that way about it because we need that support for our programs, particularly in the courts. But it's about 50 to 60% government grants. Many of our municipalities, 24 municipalities, including Simsbury, fund us with an additional stipend every year. We have then the United Way, which is about 4 or 5% of our budget. I always want to plug the United Way because they do great work and they support so many good organizations. And then it's private foundations and individuals for the rest of it, about 30%. And we've been able to grow those number of donors. I'm very proud of that and profoundly thankful, particularly for the last 2 years. It's been challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know you're facing some challenges at the federal level.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, I'm sure most of us remember many, many, many years ago when the Victims of Crime Act was passed.
Yeah.
And it was to raise dollars to compensate victims for their loss. And it was funded not by taxes, but by fines and restitutions paid by people convicted of crimes. Mm-hmm. So it was fully funded, and somewhere along the line, nobody wants to admit who, when, or where, those funds were diverted to the general treasury. And so everyone could see that the VOCA funding, the Victim of Crime Act funding, was going down and one day would be depleted. Well, this is the year it's been depleted. Congress, in its wisdom, passed, believe it or not, the name of the bill was Fix VOCA. And they passed the Fix VOCA bill, and the president signed it, but it will take 2 years to replenish those funds. So we are looking at a $7 million gap just to maintain what we've done over these next 2 years. And keep in mind, over each of these last 2 years, we have served 1,000 more victims in each of those years with the same amount of staff and the same amount of money. So this is just to stay where we are, which is pretty frantically treading water. And the Connecticut Coalition has prepared a proposal for the state legislature to fund that gap. It would be a 2-year funding, $3.5 million each year. And again, it's not asking for growth. It's just asking to maintain what we've got.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I light my candles and all of that because I can't imagine. It will mean layoffs. It will absolutely mean layoffs.
Yeah, we can't afford to let that happen. And I think the good news this year, as you know, is our state coffers are in a positive way. And I think this is a great opportunity to invest in core services like yours, in mental health services and other social services.
Well, there are a number of crises across the state, you know, the gun violence, domestic violence, but the opioid crisis.
Absolutely.
And the people who do that work, I mean, God bless them. It's endless.
Now's not the time to skimp, and we need to, I call it an investment for the health and well-being of our citizenry.
Yeah.
And you're also needing support in your court program.
Well, that the VOCA money, the Victim of Crime Act, is for the court program.
Okay.
We are also asking the state to fund our child advocate position.
That's right.
At the moment, each agency, we all have child advocates. If you're going to break the cycle, the intergenerational cycle of family violence, you have to work with the kids.
Yep.
It's so important that we do that. And each year we receive $11,000 from DSS to do that work. So we are asking for a line item. As we all know, line items aren't forever safe, but we're asking for a line item in the budget of $1.8 million that would fund a full-time child advocate for all of the agencies. To give you an idea of how that would work for Interval House, it would allow us to hire a full-time advocate that worked with the case management and all the processes. And with that other 11,000, we could fundraise for the rest and hire at least a part-time, if not another full-time, to work as in therapy with the kids who have been traumatized. Remember, when they come to us, they are newly traumatized. And we would have the ability to really make a profound difference in those kids' lives.
So that's another ask of the legislature.
Yes.
Good. Because we are, obviously nearing our opening day.
I know.
Is there anything you were involved in Jennifer's law?
Yes, of course.
Which is a wonderful piece of legislation. Is there anything you think we need to go back to on that piece of legislation, tweaking it or enhancing it?
I think it's maybe a little early to determine that.
Yep.
I credit the coalition. I think they've done something like 300 trainings. Coercive control is a tough concept for some people to understand. In my gut, I've always felt that coercive control is at the very core. It's about limiting freedom. It's about limiting options so that you are living your life walking on eggshells and you are constantly anxious and fearful. And so your options are limited. Your life is narrowed because everything follows that. The financial control, the emotional and verbal abuse, and the escalation to physical abuse. So it's going to take time for people to grasp the concept that you don't have to be beaten to be abused. And I think that's the biggest piece of this bill. We need to communicate that. The judicial branch has shown flexibility and interest in training, which is really important. The restraining orders, the protective orders, well, not the protective orders, but the restraining orders, all of the divorce, custody, visitation, it's really important that judges and family relations officers understand what coercive control is and how incredibly frightening and damaging it is.
Now, tell us about ways for folks, men and women, especially men, to support the organization, volunteer.
So glad you asked that because I know everybody thinks I'm going to ask for money, and I could, and I would like to. But there are more important things that I would ask of everybody who hears this show. Be aware of this issue. When you finish listening to this show, go out and tell your friends about it. Tell your friends what you learned about Interval House and the resources, about the issue of domestic violence. We have got to shine a light on this. We have got to raise awareness about this issue. And that is something everyone can do. You don't have to be an expert. Just talk about it. A chilling statistic from the 2017 fatality review is that 50% of the 247 homicides between 2010 and 2017, 50% of those people had colleagues at work who knew there was a problem. So talk about this. Once, if domestic violence doesn't stay in the home, it goes to work with you. Mm-hmm. And people know about it, so talk about it. Which brings me to the second huge way people can help. Stay in touch. If this pandemic has taught us anything, it's that isolation is not our friend.
No.
So stay in touch. And again, you don't have to be an expert. If you're concerned about somebody, reach out. Just say, hey, thinking about you. Send them a text. Give them a call. Thinking about you, just wanted to check in and say hi. Anything I can do for you?
Yeah.
Great to hear your voice. That's it.
Yeah.
That's all you have to do. And then a victim knows that they have a friend, a colleague, someone who is there for them. And those are the two most important things. The third most important thing you can do is invite me to speak to your civic group. I speak in churches and synagogues, the Lions Club, the Rotaries. I would love to spread the word about domestic violence and the resources we have. That would be hugely helpful.
Now, looking out in the next 5 years or so, what are your big goals for the organization?
Well, interestingly, we are in 6 months into a strategic planning.
Okay.
And we're looking very hard at the organizational chart because we are so, sadly, one of the things, I should have known this as a CEO, but we are so leanly staffed that I worry about the mental health and stamina of the wonderful, passionate advocates I have. So we have to figure out how the organization can better structure itself so we can do that continue to do that work. So we are looking very hard at that. I have two areas that I'm really passionate about growing. One is our work with children. Again, you can't break the cycle if you can't reach children. 75% of people who are abusers or in abusive relationships grew up with it. They think it's the norm. They think that's all they can expect in life. So we've got to reach those children. And those are services that we are going to look to expand. And then secondarily is the community education piece. It's really been hard to reach schools. Obviously, in the pandemic, the very core teaching is about all anybody could get to. So we have been less involved in the schools, but we've just got to get back in the schools on a regular and consistent way, talking about healthy relationships. And we're talking middle school. We're talking 6th, 7th graders. Mm-hmm. That's where we need to start. We have pretty great relationships with our regional universities. We sit on their Title IX committees, and we present and we table and we do all of that. But we really need to do much more work. 1 in 3 teens have said they've experienced bullying and harassment and violence in their dating relationships.
Staggering.
It is staggering. So those are the two areas I feel really passionate about in terms of growing and enhancing for us.
How do men better understand and get invested in your efforts? Because everyone assumes, it's just...
Talk about it. Learn about it and talk about it.
You have refresh me, you have a special...
We do. Senator Richard Blumenthal formed about, now I guess it's 11 years ago, Men Make a Difference.
That's right.
And it is a group of men, and it's really not about the money. It's about the influence, mm-hmm. who are willing to use their roles and their influence to reach out to other men and talk about this issue. And it's really been very, very powerful for us. We need men to own this issue. Mm-hmm. It is, domestic violence is not only a dividing issue in families and in our communities, but it's an economic issue. We all need to care about that, and men can do that. They are in some ways uniquely qualified to do it because 80% of abusers are men. It doesn't mean that 80% of all men are abusers by any stretch. But we need men to stand up and to own this issue and to speak out against it. That's the number one thing they can do.
Excellent. Now, talk about ways people can support you financially. I know we're going to put up your website. What is your web address?
It's intervalhousect.org.
Okay.
intervalhousect.org. And it has to be CT because, believe it or not, there are two other interval houses. One's in Canada and one's in California.
Oh boy.
So it's intervalhousect.org.
And then folks can go on, and how can people financially support you?
Well, you're able to donate right online.
Okay.
But also online, you'll find our Amazon wish list,
Okay, great.
which has been incredible. We've raised over $25,000 in goods this year from our Amazon wish list. That takes that expense right off my budget so that I can do music and art therapy for kids instead of buying disinfectant and bleach and laundry detergent. So that's big. Another thing that's big are gift cards. When victims come to us, they very often have nothing. And we are able to give them a gift card for, say, a Target or a Walmart in particular, because you can buy anything there. And what most people don't know is that that gives them a freedom they haven't experienced. It says, I value you, I trust you, do with this what you best know needs to be done. And a victim then has the freedom to go buy clothes for her kids, or buy the food they like to eat, or buy a new doll to replace the doll they left at home. So gift cards are big.
And then you have your big gala.
Yes, we are going to make every effort to have that in person.
Mask-free, pandemic-free.
I know, Society Room, April 28th. We have two other very exciting things coming up. In partnership with the World Affairs Council, March 2nd, we're going to do a virtual event bringing in leaders from around the world and the United Nations to talk about global femicide. The rise of violence and murder of women across the world is a pandemic. The World Health Organization has called it the pandemic within a pandemic. So we're going to do that. The end of March, we're bringing in Stephanie Land, who wrote The Maid. And she was a young single mother who left an abusive relationship. And she talks about the intersection of domestic violence and poverty. So we have a very busy spring, very busy.
And you have a strong presence in Simsbury. Can you give us the statistics on Simsbury? Or
Interestingly, Avon, Farmington, and Simsbury statistics have stayed roughly the same.
Okay.
They're somewhere between 18 and 24, 25 a year. A couple of years ago, I spoke with the chief of police in Simsbury, and we said, we have 22. I went back and looked up those 22 cases, and every single one of them was assessed by a policeman, a Simsbury police officer, as high lethality, high risk of lethality. So as I said to the police chief, we could be talking about only 22 cases or 22 dead women. That's how severe those cases were that year. So it's everywhere. It's, no geography. There are no boundaries. It's everywhere.
Is there a hotline that folks can call?
Yes.
And, of course, be assured of my support as one legislator, but I know there are others on both sides of the aisle who really will, I think, come together to support you this session and moving forward. And we'll see you again soon. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining me on this special episode of Office Hours.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.